Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Welcome to this new series entitled The Levels of Shaitan's Misguidance. Inshallah, in this series, and it'll be a relatively short series, only about 6 or 7 episodes or so. In this series, inshallah, we'll talk about the levels of Shaitan's misguidance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran that indeed Shaitan is your enemy, so take him as an enemy. Allah tells us clearly that Shaitan is our enemy. In other words, he doesn't want what's best for us. He doesn't want good for us. He wants to misguide us. He wants to lead us astray. So if he's our enemy, we should watch out from him. He doesn't want good for us. But Allah also tells us in the Quran, in another verse, that Shaitan does not have any power or authority over us, except those who follow him, those who are misguided, those who deviate from the truth and follow Shaitan. Then they, by choice, they're following Shaitan's whispers. Otherwise, Shaitan has no power or authority over us. He can't force us to do anything. He can only whisper and call people to his falsehood, to his misguidance, to his evil, and people choose whether they're going to respond to that and follow him or not. And Allah also tells us in the Quran that Shaitan is going to be upon the straight path. If we stop and think for a minute, we usually think, well, Shaitan's in the bad places where people are committing bad things, and it's true, Shaitan's there. But if we think about it for a second, Allah tells us in the Quran that Shaitan, as Shaitan said himself, he's going to sit for mankind upon the straight path. He's going to sit for them upon the straight path, upon Allah's straight path. If we stop and think for a second, why would Shaitan sit on the straight path? It truly makes sense, because that's where righteous people are. That's where guided people are, upon the straight path of Allah. And that's where the people that he wants to misguide are. So he's going to be there to try and misguide them away from the path of Allah. He's already misguided the people who are off the path of Allah. His work there is evident in the evil and the bad that they are doing. And so Shaitan is sitting on the straight path of Allah to misguide righteous people, believers, off the path of Allah, away from the truth, away from doing good, away from being righteous. And Shaitan doesn't come, the deception of him, why is it tricky? Why do people fall into the traps of Shaitan? And Shaitan has a lot of traps. Maybe in another series we can talk about it in more details. In this series we're going to talk about the main levels of Shaitan's misguidance. And we'll give examples of them. But Shaitan has a lot of traps and tricks that he uses. Part of his deception is that he misguides people in small steps. He doesn't come flat out and try to misguide someone into doing something that they're not used to, something too severe, too serious, too evil, but rather he comes and tries to misguide people in small steps. And Allah tells us in the Quran, Allah warns us of this. He says, "O you who believe, do not follow the footsteps of Shaitan." Again, indicating, he didn't say don't follow Shaitan, he said don't follow the footsteps of Shaitan. Because footsteps, meaning they're small, they're gradual, they're one after the other. And that's how people end up going way off the path of Allah, by following the footsteps of Shaitan. Bit by bit, gradually, he'll lead them astray off the path of Allah. And Shaitan, as the Prophet ﷺ tells us, Shaitan said, he swore that he's going to keep trying to misguide the servants of Allah as long as their souls are in their bodies. So this is not something that people might think, happens, it's one instance, 2 instances, it happens over a short period of time. It's something ongoing. As long as we're alive, Shaitan's going to keep trying to misguide us away from the path of Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ tells us in a hadith Qudsi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he created his servants hunafa, upon the truth, upon the straight path, away from falsehood. And that the shayateen, the devils, came and took them away, or misled them away from their true deen, the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah in this series we'll talk about the levels of Shaitan's misguidance, and this is based off of what Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentioned in his book Madarij al-Salikin. He talked about the different levels of Shaitan's misguidance. So inshallah, in each episode we're going to take one of those levels and discuss it in briefly. Inshallah, we're going to try and keep the episodes short, and we'll give some examples in order so we can be more aware of the different levels of Shaitan's misguidance and his evil, so we can stay away from it and protect ourselves from it. Barakallahu fikum, jazakumullah khaira, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.